Why does the West hate Putin or Russia so much? What is it? Because here's the thing. And why should we Africans be afraid of Putin, of Russia? Russia's never actually invaded our country. It's never invaded our continent. So why should we? Why should we be afraid of them? If they take Ukraine, and as long as they can give us wheat, why should we care?
Okay, so let me tell you a story.
Go on.
In terms of it. First of all, facts matter, right? And the narrative that is there, not just in Africa, it's around the world. It's here in Ireland. It's in the U.S. Is, it was NATO that started this war over Ukraine. Well, that's absolute. If you believe that, I'll sell you some property down on the coast where I live. Okay? 20 years ago in 2004, Vladimir Putin, who had come into Russia a few years, began making plans to effectively try to expand Russian power, right? He felt like Russia had been humiliated because it lost the Cold War. And we can discuss the Cold War. I'm not a huge fan of American foreign policy in the Cold War. We can discuss that. But Putin felt it. What Putin then began to do is Putin began trying to destabilize countries. Now, they weren't African countries at this point. But by 2007, he was conducting cyber warfare to try to break Estonia, one of the Baltic states.
Yeah.
Right? In 2008, he attacked Georgia on the borders, which takes place, right? By 2010, he's trying to undermine governments throughout Eastern Europe using what we call hybrid warfare. And of course, in 2014, when the people of Ukraine pushed back, and it was the people of Ukraine, it wasn't NATO, it wasn't the US, people of Ukraine say, we want political rights. We want to be free from repression. And the pro-Russian leader flees. Putin strikes back, seizes part of Ukraine, Crimea, starts to try to split the east of Ukraine off. And that's the story before you get to 2022, right? But he's also done more. Russia's massive disinformation campaign, which intervenes in elections around the world, not just the US elections, German elections, French elections, elections in Scotland, in Brexit, right? And now I'm getting to your place in Africa. You're not aside from all of this, because what Russia does is we want to expand our economic power and we want to push back against the Americans. Africa has got a lot of resources. So what are we going to do? Let's go into sub-Saharan Africa. Let's go into places like Mali. Let's go in and support coups in those countries. Let's send in Russian paramilitaries, the best known of them being the Wagner Group. And the Wagner Group are going to take resources out of those countries at a discounted rate and take them back to Russia. And Wagner's caused a hell of a lot of instability. And I'm not saying, by the way, that the Americans are blameless for what they've done in the past. I'm not blameless for what the Europeans. You talk about Mali, you can talk about the French in the past. I'm just saying, eyes open on what the Russians are doing.
Right.
The Russians are not there being the victim of others, and they are not leaving Africa alone in terms of what they're doing. I mean, the other power that's involved here, if we were really going to get into this, is the Chinese.
Absolutely, right? The Chinese, yes. And there's a quote that I found, and I thought I liked it very much. I thought I'd share it with you and our listeners. Empires implode from within due to their own excesses. Is that where United States has gotten to?
Let's break that down. And then let me say two things.
Go ahead.
Which is going to sound a bit strange, given me that you've got me on here to talk about Trump. The first is...
Well, we can talk everything. You're here to talk everything.
Well, and watch how I'm going to do this. First, I wish we didn't live in such interesting times. I mean, I would be so happy if it was boring. I mean, I wake up every morning and wish that I didn't have to get onto my website and cover some bit of craziness. Secondly, I now have a policy that when I write stories for EA Worldview or when I do interviews with other outlets, if I can, I don't lead with what Trump said, because I don't want Trump to have the news cycle. You know, I'm actually listening to your news headlines, and I'm actually interested in Nigerian politics, right? So it's like, that's where I would want my lead to be.
Right.
So my lead here is going to actually be about America and in terms of where we are. And again, I'm going to sound something that's going to say really strange. I have never been one who really liked the idea of America as a superpower, even though at the start of this century, America, which had historically said we are not an empire, there were all these commentators saying, we're now the superpower. It's the unipolar era. I never liked that because there's always other countries who have interest, who do have some form of their power. They aren't just simply puppets. So it's not just like America pulling the strings. But if you really want to go down that line of when America started to really undo itself, it was in 2003. I mean, it was the invasion of Iraq because they failed. I mean, they flat out failed. Saddam Hussein fell, that's fine. But Iraq fell apart. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died. About 5,000, I think just under 5,000 American troops, if you want to add that in. But it really showed the limits of American power, as did Afghanistan, which goes for 20 years, from 2001 to 2021. And then what you had was you had the economic shocks. You had the Great Recession that affected a lot of us, but including in the United States. You had Trump coming in on the back of the Great Recession, playing the snake oil salesman. Then we had COVID. So the idea of America as this colossus bestriding the earth, which I never completely bought into, even if they were the leading military power, the leading economic power, it gets exposed. And when it gets exposed, everybody swings the other way and says, oh, it's a multipolar world, or it's a world which is going to be dominated by BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And by the way, people who think BRICS is going to dominate the world, here's a newsflash for you. India and China don't get along. Okay, I just want to say that. Every time I do work with Indian media, it's like, are we going to be attacked by China? It's like, well, okay. And South Africa doesn't necessarily get along with everybody in that group either.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack BRICS because Trump has already pulled India out of BRICS pretty much. Yes. It
is. So where am I getting to with all of this? What I'm getting to here is that what you've got a kaleidoscope of power that takes place, right? Now, that means the U.S. still has influence. It's still, as we have mentioned, very influential because it backs Israel over Gaza, and that has had deadly consequences. It's influential in Africa, as are the Chinese, as the Russians are in some parts of the continent. Without denying African countries their power, that's fine. But what we're at a moment, and which gets to your question is the empire implodes within I think, I'm going to turn it to something which is very personal to me. I'm worried that the American system is imploding. But it's not imploding the way that we thought it would. It's not imploding the way that we thought it would, which is American overreach. They'll be out of resources. The military will be overextended. America's still one of the richest countries. America's going to implode within because they lost a decent and respectful political culture. And we can talk about how social media is part of that, new media is part of that. But what happened here is that America, rather than having that type of dialogue and discussion that you need to keep a country moving forward, it turned it into a battle of us versus them. And Donald Trump has exploited it. And he's now at the point where he and his unelected co-president, Elon Musk, are trying to tear the system apart.
That very short phrase, America has lost the decent political, structure, I think is what you say.
Political culture. Political culture. The way we talk to each other. Yeah.
Yes. That's so important on many levels. And, we could spend a couple of minutes actually unpacking that.